advice. You never know if it could change your life. Take a chance, you need the wrong or right. You never know if you know.
Okay.
I'm like, cut that one out.
All right. Okay. And scene. Hey, welcome to Dungeon Master of None. I'm Dungeon Master Matt, and we're here from sea to desert across the shining lands of Flanaess, from the ice waste to the north, down the shores of the near Diva to Kaoland and the Azure Sea and Farundi and a bunch of other places I can't see. I'm here with my good friend Andy to talk about the world of Greyhawk.
Hey, everybody, this is going to be great. By the way, it's near Div.
Just near Div.
Near Div. Yeah. So sometimes they made jokes about near dive when they had to go underwater, but near Div.
Oh, God. So Greyhawk is one of the published worlds campaign settings made specifically for Dungeons and Dragons. And we've talked about, you can go back to our archives and look at episodes we've done about Planescape and Eberron and the Forgotten Realms. But we figured our next episode should be about Greyhawk because it's kind of the oldest. I don't know, Blackmore might give it a run for its money, but yeah, Empire of the Petal Throne.
In terms of published TSR products for game world settings, and also in terms of really a fully developed game world, I think it's fair to say that the world of Greyhawk is the first in the Dungeons and Dragons collection of worlds. Of course, it also holds a great good memory type situation for those of us who have been playing for a long time, and so I've enjoyed it for many years.
Yeah, it's the first. It set sort of all the tropes that we think of when we think of this is what your typical Dungeons and Dragons world might look like, and that shouldn't be surprising because for people who don't know, the primary mover behind it is Gary Gygax.
Yeah, Gary Gygax developed it. It kind of grew out of his home game. Really, the very first game that he ran of Dungeons and Dragons was set in the underneath Castle Greyhawk, and as he expanded it, he had the need to add more and more content. He had to have a city where people could go to rest and sell stuff, and that was Greyhawk City. And then the world all kind of grew around that organically.
It seems like it was kind of made, at least at first, like kind of begrudgingly or reluctantly. Like he was like, these fucking people, they want to wish there was like a history and a backstory and someone other than the king in charge or a god other than the gods, and I got to come up with this shit now. These little piggies, they want more and more.
Well, I don't know if it was begrudging. I can tell you for sure that in the late 70s especially, Gary was going to a lot of conventions. He's getting a lot of questions from people.
Yeah, going to a lot of questions
about what the world is like.
Yeah.
And Gary, ever the master salesman, is like, I bet you I could make a pretty darned good well-selling product out of this. And as a result, in 1980, they came out with the World of Greyhawk Folio, which with two beautiful full-color maps by Darlene, classics, and then a lot of great background material, kind of in digest magazine format.
In like Dragon Magazine.
Yeah. Well, but in addition, as part of the folio itself, there's a lot of kind of gazetteer type information in here.
Okay.
Info on the countries and the rivers and stuff. There's heraldry in there. So there's a little everything.
I was confused at first to where to start with Greyhawk, but it seems like the consensus that we've come to, right, is that if you're gonna find one book on it, find the World of Greyhawk Folio, right? It's the original best Bible.
Absolutely. So, and keep in mind, there are always multiple versions of things that sold well. The original 1980 World of Greyhawk gazetteer, I guess you'd say, in the jacket format with the large full color maps. That was great. They reissued it in 1983 with some expanded material that's also really good. All of it by Gygax, and all worthwhile products to go back and look at.
Yeah. So it's because I before we had talked, when we were just talking about Greyhawk, I found supplemental 1 Greyhawk, and I'm like, ooh, the publication date on this is really old. I'm gonna get a PDF of this and check it out. I'm like, oh, there is nothing about Greyhawk here. There are rules for comeliness.
Yes.
I had forgotten that was once part of the game. God damn it. So thanks. So that has nothing to do with Greyhawk.
Well, you've gone back into the Wayback Machine here, and in original D&D back when it was published in the little sand-colored booklets, and then those were published in the wood grain boxes. And yeah, one of the little booklets was called Greyhawk, and no, it was not a good information for World of Greyhawk info.
I mean, I have to admit, like, I got tired of reading old rules for things I already know about. Like, all the magic items that we love are in that thing, but I don't think I saw any references to actual anything about the world. Maybe I skipped over them, but
no, I think one of the great things that the Gazetteer did is it took a lot of information that had previously just been collected in Dragon magazine articles or in lore that Gary had and stories that he told to people at conventions, and it gathered it all together in one place so everyone could enjoy it, and it had some consistency to it. Another great thing that it did is it had tie-ins to a lot of other TSR modules that they were publishing at the time. The modules themselves said, and by the way, this module takes place at more or less this hex within the World of Greyhawk setting. So it was kind of tied everything together.
Right. One of the reasons we wanted to do this episode is both Rob and I talked about how much we loved some of the lore that was built around the Ghost of Saltmarsh hardcover that was released, right, which is based on original Greyhawk module, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh.
Right. All those U series of original first edition D&D modules were part of the UK arm of TSR, and then the subsequent UK series of TSR modules. And all of those, I don't know whether this was by design or by directive from Gary himself, or whether it just kind of happened, but all those wound up being set in kind of the southwest quadrant of this Flanaess and World of Greyhawk setting, in or near the Hold of the Sea Princes and the Kingdom of Keeland, and an awful lot of those adventures are all kind of focused in one place. And more than one time I've successfully run campaigns within the World of Greyhawk that's pretty much just stringing together those UK series of modules, which are excellent, by the way.
They are really good. And so they basically just said, hey, British people, you get this corner of the world. I mean, the North Americans get the rest.
I assume that's what happened, but I don't really know that to be the case. And
all right, here's a part I don't care about that much. I know you can't fuck it up too bad with your dirty, uncanon lore.
Well, I don't know if that's the case or not, because I do know that Gary cared a lot about his world, and I think he took a lot of ownership in it. And it's obviously he spent a lot of painstaking time and put as much detail as he could into it. No one's claiming, by the way, that it's a perfect game world. I don't think it is that. I don't think it's as richly developed as Forgotten Realms, which really, really goes into terrific detail. I think Planescape and other settings have a lot going for them as well. But there's really a lot to Greyhawk that's really remarkable. And okay, so one thing that I like a lot is that Gary cared a lot about history, because of course he was a military gaming guy originally, and in particular the migrations of people, how over time people kind of move around the world and develop. And so the World of Greyhawk really goes into a lot of detail about kind of different branches of tribes and how they spread through the world. And sometimes they mixed together, but sometimes they stayed separate. Mm-hmm. And really it was a remarkable thing, and gave character. There's dozens and dozens of nations on these maps, and each of them has their own character, at least in part because of the thinking that Gary put behind these things.
Yeah, the sort of background of the history. I mean, I have to. I think Gary might have written some of the things a little differently if he had read any literature on migrations and history that's maybe become available in the last 30 years. But at the same time, it's still a decent development of a fictional world's migrations. And it's a style of world building, right, where you start with history or either start with what you want and you work back through history to have some kind of, somewhat logical explanation for why these two nations don't get along or why their cultures are different or something like that.
Yeah. Can we talk about the theory of world building really briefly?
Yeah, I think this is a good spot because this is and I think Greyhawk is so different from Forgotten Realms, which I know most of our listeners are familiar with because WotC has drilled down on Forgotten Realms and double down, double bet. They've gone all in.
Right.
There's some metaphor here where I'm just saying they love Forgotten Realms.
All the metaphors
for Forgotten Realms. And Greyhawk is built differently. Like, not only is it a different feel of a world, the way it was constructed, I think, is very different.
Yeah, so, well, let's talk about that. So in my way of thinking, there are really two different ways that you build a world, and I'm going to call them top down and bottom up. And so if you can imagine,
we're going to trademark those terms. I don't think anyone else is using them.
I don't know.
You can come to us.
I can't guarantee I haven't stolen that from somebody, so careful.
No.
All right. So think of a world as a big pyramid. It rests on a broad foundation of very general facts. And as you go higher and higher on the levels of the pyramid, you build up levels that are narrower because they're more specific, but are more directly relevant to whatever area you're gaming in. And at the very tip of the pyramid is the focus of the story. So wherever that dungeon is that people are exploring.
And sometimes all you need is just the tip.
Absolutely. And if that's all you need, then you would do what we would call top-down world construction. In other words, you would start from the top where you are.
Is it really world building if it's just the tip?
Well, so okay. First of all,
I'm going to stop now.
First of all, that's what she said. Second of all, that is what Gary did originally. When Gary did this originally, his very first level of World of Greyhawk, where he was running his two kids through the adventure, he didn't have anything except one level underneath a castle, and then he added additional levels, and then he added the city, and then he added more surroundings. And so really he started from the point of the spear where the adventure was happening, and then he built it down. So that's top down. But then at some point, like I said, there'd been a lot of kind of lore about the World of Greyhawk that he had shared with people through magazine articles, that sort of thing. And he wanted to have a really concrete, well-constructed world that he could hang a lot of adventures on, not just one adventure. And so when he set about to do the 1980 version of the folio, I think that was very much kind of bottom-up world construction, where he was trying to lay a decent foundation for the bones of the earth and then build upon that in such a way that not just one adventure, but a whole host, a whole family and generation of adventurers could rest successfully on that world. And so I guess the World of Greyhawk was built a little bit of both. It was kind of starting from the top and then also coming up from the bottom. And really, if you think about it, most world building works in some combination of those two.
For sure.
And I think really when you get down to it,
no one who has ever done bottom up, right, the entire way has probably ever actually run a game in that, right? Because if you never think about the story, then, it's just going to be an exercise in world building, which can be fun in its own right, but it's not good for a campaign. Right?
Well, plus,
and if you don't add some of the bones at the bottom, right, then, if you're just always constantly building out from your story, you might lose some logical.
Well, allegedly, when Ed Greenwood first showed off the Forgotten Realms to the TSR people,
I remember reading about this. It was in upstate New York. He found the 2 tablets buried under the ground of gold, and he had a special thing.
Something like that.
Yeah,
something. Yeah,
like it was a momentous thing in the history of our people.
No, but I think when he did finally show off his stuff to the people at TSR, he had already amassed file cabinets worth of information because he had been so incredibly invested in his game world and pulling together the detail for it. And really, I'm very impressed with Forgotten Realms' level of detail and how very much bottom up that world seems to be. But ultimately, every game world is a little bit of a sham. If you dig deeply enough into these invented game worlds, you will find the bottom. You will find that it's really just a fake front. It's really just a Western
Timken village,
a Western set. And if you look behind the buildings, you'll see the shell behind it. And I think the same is true of Greyhawk, that there's kind of this veneer of history-ishness about it, but if you dig deeply enough into it, you'll find only falsehood behind the truthiness.
Yeah, at the end of the day, all your history world building is so shallow and compared to the true depth and breadth of actual human experience. It's all colonial Williamsburgs. However, I think the other thing that is cool about Greyhawk, at least in the folio that we looked at, and even really there's some other materials out there, the Living Greyhawk Gazetteer that was made for 3rd edition, is that the end goal of the books describing the world is something a little bit different, at least for me, coming to Greyhawk first from Forgotten Realms and Eberron, where your campaign source books that your dungeon master might get on a region would have 3 or 4 pages, right, with details about plot hooks and potential dungeons and sites of interest and a paragraph about 3 important NPCs from that region. Whereas those books on Greyhawk are a little sketchier, right? You have a very clear world, but the gazetteer in them is like 2 paragraphs per region, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. It leaves it much more open-ended.
So all fun stuff is not just the product of one person. While Gygax did kick things off very nicely with the world of Greyhawk, eventually he was no longer involved at TSR, and other people kind of picked it up. And so you mentioned the Living Greyhawk and the Gazetteers. All that stuff happened substantially after Gary was no longer a part of TSR, and that was essentially 3rd edition stuff. And they did great stuff. And you've looked at the PDFs, which you can, if you poke around online, you can find them.
Or on Drive-Thru RPG.
Great. But those go into a lot more detail, and they really kind of dig lovingly into a lot of the different sites. You know, not only do they add more detail, but over the course of the history of this section of the world of Greyhawk, TSR and WotC kind of evolved the history of it, and they advanced the calendar, and world events changed.
Right, the Greyhawk Wars.
Exactly. And so those things advance as well. And so if you read through chronologically, starting from the folio edition and then moving into the Living Greyhawk stuff, it kind of almost tells a fictional tale of the evolution of the history of this world. And it's, if nothing else, it's a great source book material and a worthwhile read. Something else that I think I would recommend to people, which is great fun, is go to annabmeyer.com. Anna Meyer is a cartographer. For the last 20 years, she has really a labor of love, is she's been taking all published information relating to the world of Greyhawk, and she's been creating, kind of using as her starting point, these maps by Darlene from the 1980 version. And she's been creating these incredibly detailed maps that incorporate into them all the lore that she's been able to find regarding different areas of the world of Greyhawk, and then, you know, adding some of her own detail in as well. And the result is this interactive series of maps where you can zoom in and you can download these maps.
So if you wanted to run, let's say, a hex crawl adventure, but didn't want to do any of the work to plan it out, somewhat you could steal these maps and run a Greyhawk hex scroll.
Yeah, I mean, you should definitely go to annabmeyer.com and see.
We'll have a look at the link in the show notes.
Absolutely, and you can see what she has up there to offer. It's a lot of material, and it's well worth people to poke around and see what's out there. It's great.
Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now my whole team fucking here. Started from the bottom, now we're here. Started from the bottom, now the whole team here, nigga. Started from the bottom, now we here.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about is what is like different about Greyhawk, not just in the way it was built or created, but the sort of what's in the actual world, right? If, you know, Planescape is interdimensional fantasy and Forgotten Realms is high fantasy. Like, how can we describe Greyhawk? Like, what flavor do players and dungeon masters get from it?
So as fantasy worlds go, Greyhawk is pretty dark. I think what Gary wanted to achieve is he wanted to have a world where evil in all its forms was really ascendant, and that the players were, in some sense, fighting a uphill, hopeless battle against the forces of evil encroaching on, the few sanctuaries of good in the world. And so if you, for instance, took this 1980 folio map that we're sitting around here, and you were to point to different areas of the map, a large number of these areas are dominated by evil forces, and there's just a few lone holdouts of civilization kind of pushing back against the darkness.
Barbarians, pirates, demon empires, and even from within, secret societies are just almost ready to overrun everything.
Absolutely. There's a society of assassins with their kind of hidden fortress off on the edge of the world, but who have nevertheless infiltrated many of the governments and are ready to strike. As you say, there's a evil demigods who have
He's
forged...
just in the world, right? And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't an evil demigod rule the world?
Absolutely.
Rule a chunk of the world.
So not only is he ruling the world, but he's a clear and present menace, and there is a hot war going on, probably not too far away from wherever the adventurers are adventuring. And so you know that the forces of Euz and his fellow evil guys who hate each other, the Horn Society, are always going to be lurking around somewhere. Then there's lots of just broad chaos. There's the bandit realms and the shield lands, where there's all these feudal societies and where chaos is dominant, and various
even
forms.
the sort of central location, the city of Greyhawk, a sort of cosmopolitan mercantile trading city full of high-level wizards and stuff, is maybe not the best place to live.
No, certainly not a safe place to live. And yet, as megalopolises within the world of Greyhawk goes, it's probably the best of the bad bunch.
Sure.
The local rivaling city of divers is like complete slime bag.
Right.
So
Wretched Hive.
Right. Wretched Hive.
Scumability, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, yes.
And I think one of the other defining things that I think makes Greyhawk very different is I feel like there's just a little more like Conan, Robert Howard in it than Forgotten Realms. Like there's just used to be all these big, huge magical empires who were so much more magical and cool, and there's ruins. And now, yeah, every single fantasy setting has this, but they all kind of have that weird evil slime to them that they have in Robert Howard. And that's fun.
And a key part of the mythology of the world of Greyhawk, and really one of the things that spawned all these migrations I was talking about earlier, is that centuries, millennia ago, there was this great battle between two opposing powerful civilizations.
The Bakloonish Empire and I want to say Suluese.
Correct. Both of them.
Everything in Greyhawk is so fucking hard to say.
Well,
but once you get a hang of it, it's kind of fun. I have to admit, it grows on you.
If you have trouble with that, then you're going to have trouble with Empire of the Petal Throne. But anyway,
I am never fucking touching that shit.
Well,
never.
Well, listen, by the way, I know we're not here to talk about Empire of the Petal Throne, but the Tecumel project, check out the work that Jeff D is doing on the Tecumel project, and recasting that. Has really kind of recovered Mayer Barker's work and created a truly unique fantasy setting that has its own, even though Greyhawk doesn't do linguistics very well.
You get a weird anthropologist to write your setting.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta do some linguistics.
I'm telling you, Mayer Barker really did a great job of creating a brand new, completely separate thing that has almost no touchstone in the real world, whereas World of Greyhawk obviously draws a lot from
the planet's called Oerth.
Right. I know, that's right.
Which is Earth with an O.
Could it be more on the nose? Yes. No, it could not. But anyway, So the key to the mythology was that these two great ancient empires used weird magics to blow themselves up. and kind of the whole left half of the map is this ruin that
just screaming for your players to get to higher levels and go investigate.
Yeah, and there's things on them that just say ruins. And so, yeah, what's going to inspire a player more than looking at something on a blank area of the map and say, what's there? You know, and many game worlds just don't do that enough anymore.
Yeah. No, the rain of colorless fire and the, what was the other attack called?
The invoked devastation.
The invoked devastation, right? To basically, I mean, here's what happens when a Midwestern boy who grows up in the Cold War, it's like, all right, well, how do I write my history? Oh, okay. 2 superpowers annihilated each other. One was evil.
Right. Well, yes, exactly. And so
I love it.
But I'm glad that they worked that into the history and that kind of all spun throughout the mythology of Greyhawk that follows are the migrations of these various people, including the fairly evil Siluese Empire and their remnants, and how they kind of spread into the world and how their influences are felt. And that's very kind of Elric-ish and also very Conan-ish. And so you're right. I think kind of these sort of darker pulp era fantasies really play a very strong influence in the world of Greyhawk, probably more so than they do in the other published game settings.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about like what's the major themes of Greyhawk or what's different about Greyhawk is if you go by what's written in the published stuff, most of the NPCs that you will encounter who are, let's say, in charge of a kingdom or city or something like that, instead of being a noble or a commoner with maybe who can be killed with 2 whacks of a sword, might be a 15th level fighter, 5th level illusionist or something like that. So you're going to have a lot of higher level NPCs.
Yeah.
And that's kind of cool.
A key example of that is the Hold of the Stone Fist, which is as Conan a joint, if ever there was one, and is ruled by
2 snakes facing each other.
is ruled by a very powerful fighter who basically carved an empire out of nothingness.
It sort of goes on the like assumption that like half of the monarchs here are basically like, they earned experience and they're really powerful people.
Yes,
not just because of their legitimacy or bloodlines, which you might find in other settings where the ruler of a place is actually, I'm a 5th level commoner, right? No, they're a 15th level paladin.
Yeah.
And so if you want to like knock them off, you better be ready.
And I have to imagine that some of that is because Gygax had the usual players we're familiar with, and like, oh, I appear before the king, I try and kill him.
Yeah,
okay, well, the king's gonna have some freaking levels. What do you think of that, yo?
So. Yeah. The other thing that I would say that's different is like Gygax loves is sort of high medievalism as it is presented probably to American kid growing up in the 40s and 50s. So, I didn't see a lot about gunpowder or anything like that. So I could be wrong on that. Oh,
yeah, I mean, I'm pointing right now within the folio to all kinds of incidental art of knights on horseback with lances. All that,
just high heraldry, or lots of heraldry, high chivalry kind of stuff.
Yeah,
it's the Middle Ages as you imagine them, maybe not actually as they actually were. But I like that, right? That's probably what your players assume.
Yeah, I think, we know from the history of it that the Greyhawk group and other groups grew out of wargaming. They grew out of people actually doing kind of medieval war games. And then at some point, Gary and the others said, hey, what if I throw a dragon in there? Won't that be badass? And so definitely the earlier days of Dungeons and Dragons were very much all about recasting the kind of chivalry days of fantasy in this way. So.
God bless nerds. They have to be like, all right, what is the one like period of military history where we're maybe unsure whether anyone had any good tactics or strategy at all, right? Sources say, maybe they didn't really know what was going on or how to win these things. But okay, let's make a game out of that one.
Yeah. Well, hey,
well, there you go.
Yeah, I'm not a military scientist, so I can't say for sure whether they did a good job on that aspect of it. I can tell you that, frankly, every attempt to go back after Dungeons and Dragons and bring in the wargaming element, like the first edition battle system type stuff, was, in my opinion, not a great success. The battle system was a reasonable attempt to try and get back to the chainmail roots and bring more kind of mass action combat back in, with mixed results. I can't say I've ever really had a good time doing that.
We've talked on this podcast before about, the Unearthed Arcana 5th edition rules, Pathfinder's mass combat system, Matt Colville's mass combat system, and while you might get some mileage out of each of those, it always seems more trouble than it's worth, and less fun, more boring.
And yet, in a game world like this, where you're concerned with large nations and all these conflicts among them, it's inevitable for kind of mass combat to become part of the story. But that doesn't mean it has to be part of your game.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say that's different about Greyhawk is that, remember, this was made in the original edition of Dungeons and Dragons. So you're not going to find in any of the lore, there's not going to be a kingdom of tieflings or of dragonborn or something like that. There is any clever dungeon master can find a place for any weird thing your player wants to be in almost any world. But if you're looking for a world that has those already, the work of that already done for you, this ain't it.
It's probably true. And yet the foundations of those things were set by Greyhawk. For example, the Great Kingdom, which is probably the largest, most powerful kingdom in the world of Greyhawk, is famous for being basically demon haunted, that the great houses were subject to demons.
Their bloodlines may not be as pure.
There you go. So you can see where kind of the whole tiefling thing started to come. And I think that seed was planted by Gygax and has since then turned into what it is today.
And heart of people with horns.
Yeah.
We love it. We love to see it. We love to see it. All right. Okay. So let's just talk, like, if you wanted to run a Greyhawk campaign, what are some fun ideas? What if there's an Greyhawk campaign, what might it be?
So Greyhawk had the initial idea of having the mega dungeon, and specifically that mega dungeon, the dungeon underneath Castle Greyhawk, the lowest levels of which were occupied by demigods. And so I think better than other game settings, the world of Greyhawk draws demigods and lesser powered gods in direct conflict with higher powered heroes more effectively than other settings do. They actually make them not just kind of a background part of the story, but they are active participants in the game world.
There's a whole chapter of quasi-hero and demigod deities. And hey, if your players had ever been like, we want to kill a god,
right,
which is super fun and a cool story to tell.
Right.
There you go.
Absolutely. And then,
there's a ton of colorful quasi. Do you have a favorite quasi deity?
A favorite quasi
or a
deity?
Hero deity, demigod?
Oh goodness. So I'm a big fan of Gilgamesh, but
sure.
All the deities and demigod stuff.
Right. For me, Uz or Iuz,
yes.
Right? He's the Sauron, but he's a sneaky Sauron.
Right.
He's a sneaky bastard Sauron.
Another good one is, I know I'm going to mispronounce this, but Igglewilv, which is kind of the vampire / sorceress / demigoddess villain of one of the adventurers, but she crops up in many different places and throughout the history of Greyhawk.
My least favorite, and this is a warning to all world builders out there, is the one that is, I can't say it, but it's Gygax, like backwards or whatever. It's the self-insert character.
Well, so that goes way back into the whole Castle Greyhawk adventure, but the Mad Mage Zagig was the guy responsible for building this crazy house of a dungeon and tormenting adventurers with it. And
we get it, Gary.
It's kind of a nutty Mary Sue version of Gygax. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm not saying that you need to incorporate that into your games, but I do think that drawing in demigods very powerful wizards and other characters.
Just, Greyhawk seems lousy with 20th level wizards who are going to fuck your shit up.
It does.
I love it.
But you have great stuff like the Valley of the Mage, where one of those ultra powerful archmages has basically got entire races as his servitors. I really love that. One of the things I very much love about World of Greyhawk is how nicely they incorporated ray guns and robots into swords and sorcery with the whole expedition to the Barrier Peaks thing.
That is set in Greyhawk.
It is. And then really since that module, there have been various other little articles and adventures that kind of hint at a larger exposure of those things. And I just love the fact that you can have a world that's nutty enough where you can say, oh yeah, I've got fantasy and magic, and oh no, here's a robot and a blaster, and what happens when you play with this grenade? I don't know. Push the button, and
push the button and roll the dice.
Yes, and that's one of the great things about it is that it may have started with some of the classic fantasy tropes, but I don't think Gygax or anyone who came after him allowed themselves to be boxed in by that. And they were like, hey, if this goes in a crazy direction, let's run with it.
He seemed, or at least him and all the people who worked on this, right, seemed very willing to sort of not let there be sacred cows of like, we can't have this chocolate in this peanut butter. Let's just put them together.
Yep, absolutely. And credit to them as well for not giving into the satanic panic and we have demons
having the Horn Society.
Yeah. And goodness knows, growing up in the South, well, different people had different experiences, but certainly as a teenager playing Dungeons and Dragons in the South, that was an impact on my life. But, they kept doing their thing, and thank goodness.
All right. Well, Andy and I are off on a quick bone march, and we'll be back after a break to talk about our favorite parts and what you can steal. All right, so an important first question, Andy, which is what is the difference among frost barbarians, ice barbarians, and snow barbarians? There's a lot of different barbarians in the world of Greyhawk, and those three have very different or similar names.
You caught me.
I don't know either. It doesn't matter.
I don't know, but I've got the book right here, and I can read it.
We can look it up.
Do I actually know? No.
So some of the things are named in a silly way.
Yeah,
including the barbarians. But I guess they're named by outsiders, right? They they don't call themselves frost barbarians.
No, although I think the names that they do have for themselves sound like frost and snow, and they're fairly silly. So
nice.
Let's not go there.
Okay, cool. So what are our favorite things from Greyhawk? And these are the things that you as Dungeon Masters, even if you're not going to run a Greyhawk campaign, that we encourage you to steal, switch 2 letters around and stick them in your own campaign worlds.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, this is just like totally a throwaway thing. But we mentioned earlier the large lake, the Near Div. And
it's a big lake right in the middle of the map, right by Greyhawk, right?
Suspiciously Lake Superior shaped. And
okay.
But the cool thing about it is
Wisconsin, go Badgers.
But really, there isn't much information on it other than that kind of these throwaway lines about it. Its inestimable depths and how, it's a bottomless lake. And it really makes you think, okay, yeah, I mean, it's just kind of these vaguely suggestive lines that say, hey, this is this unusually deep lake. And it really makes you wonder, I wonder what's down below the waves there. So really, just something about the language really made you think that this could be an area that's suitable for adventuring.
So, it maybe goes into the infinite levels of the Underdark and maybe the center of the world, et cetera, et cetera.
Who knows how far it goes, Matt?
So good.
So really can't mention Greyhawk without mentioning kind of the big first published campaign within it, which would be starting with the module Village of Hamlet and then moving into the Temple of Elemental Evil.
Listen, fuckers, Tharizdun is not from the Forgotten Realms. He is a Greyhawk dude. All right.
Yeah.
Or whatever he is.
And Tharizdun...
They stole him.
Tharizdun was pretty cool in that basically he kind of got dripped and drabbed into several different TSR properties until finally, going back to Monte Cook, who pulled it all together in 3rd edition for the return to the Temple of Elemental Evil. But this series of properties of adventures is set in a specific area of the world of Greyhawk, specifically set in an area sort of between Valuna and the Kingdom of Furiondi, but also rather close to the elvish nation of Selene. And it's just in an area that's only loosely controlled by any particular nation. And there's lots of there's the old forest and druids nearby. There's gnomes over in another area. And then, of course, the sinister forces of the Temple of Elemental Evil itself, menacing the countryside. And so it's just kind of one of those areas where a lot of different fantasy world elements come together, and a wonderful place to set an adventure.
Right. It seems to me, if you're looking for like a place to start in Greyhawk, right? And it's conveniently right in the middle of any map of Flanaess, right? Is Furundi or however you say it.
Yeah.
Right. It's the perfect starting spot.
But what's cool is that the adventure, as it progresses, kind of draws elements of these other things in. For instance, as we mentioned earlier, Valuna and Furiondi are menaced by Euz to the north and his empire. Well, you can run into Euz personally when you're near the tail end of the adventure. The prince of the kingdom is imprisoned in the dungeon. And so there's all the kind of these elements that draw the world into the dungeon environment. I really like that.
It's a great example of how to make a mega dungeon that isn't just about the dungeon.
Yeah, that kind of broadens the reach of the dungeon out into a larger world, and you feel like it's not just a mega dungeon that's been dropped into any old location. It's actually somehow woven into the fabric of the world that surrounds it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, my next favorite thing to steal is one that you sort of mentioned a little bit, which is the Old Faith, right? And I feel like it gets, of all the classes in Dungeons and Dragons, I feel like druids work best when every druid knows the other druid, or is somehow connected to them. And one of the things in Greyhawk is druidism is this kind of older religion that you might find the sort of yokels of various places practicing, but in many ways it's maybe a better or kinder religion than some of these invading gods, Fultus, but yeah, I love the Old Faith, and in almost every world I build, I put in something similar, the Green Man or something like that.
And that is kind of one of the cool things, I think, that Gygax did, is he said, okay, we have multiple different cultures that sometimes blend together, and one of the things they do is they also sort of blend their faiths together. And so you'll have kind of the gods of the new faith blended together with the gods of the old faith, and sometimes worshiped side by side. And I think that's pretty cool. I think another area of the world that is pretty interesting is what's going on in the South Province of the Great Kingdom. So the Great Kingdom used to be very powerful and cohesive, but it's like I said, demons have taken over the rulership and they've fragmented terribly.
Everything's disintegrating. And
right. Yeah. And so this is actually an area where good is on the ascend, in that the South Province, which is still kind of dominated by evil vassals of the emperor, are challenged by these breakaway states around them, Mide and the Iron Hills and Onwall. And so there's kind of almost this Sherwood Forest-esque vibe to, a mode of adventure where you are part of these lesser breakaway rebellious states that are constantly having to fend off the attacks of the evil empire. And I feel like that's a pretty cool mode of adventuring that's very different from what's going on, say, in the Kingdom of Furiandi, which is essentially a peaceful, fairly benign kingdom that just happens to have a lot of evil around the edges. A lot of good mix within this world.
Yeah, I mean, if you had players who are like, because everyone does, right? Or like, I really like Game of Thrones, right? And you're like, okay, well, we could do a campaign in some kind of, quasi Civil War type place. The Great Kingdom is perfect for that. What about so when Rob and I a couple episodes ago were reviewing Ghosts of Saltmarsh, we talked about Kaoland and the Hold of the Sea Princes, both of which are figure prominently in those modules, and we lamented the fact that the hardback didn't have that much information on them. Any fun facts that you like about either of those places?
Absolutely. So Keeland is neat. Keeland, and I don't know if it's Keeland or Kaoland, but it is essentially a benign monarchy as well. But not too long ago, they had expansionist ambitions that failed, and so
there's a lot of examples in Greyhawk of quote unquote good kingdoms doing really shitty things, right?
Yeah, if you dig even a teaspoonful deep into the ground, you will come across shittiness and say, But
it's almost like why did they go to the trouble of labeling some kingdoms good and some evil? It's like, oh, okay. Well, okay, I guess I know why. The actual evil ones are like, sacrificing babies and have a demon as the president.
Well, I think what I would say in the case of Keeland is that they are benevolent today, but really not too many generations ago, at least in terms of the folio history, they were actually quite nasty and imperially ambitious, were thwarted, have broken away mostly peacefully into some vassal states. And then just to the south of them, there's an area called the Hold of the Sea Princes. And the Hold of the Sea Princes used to be just flat out pirates. And pirates who found that the kind of the jungle-ish, far away southern area was a decent place for them to harbor their ships and to lurk and wait to harass shipping. And after multiple generations of doing that, basically went straight and became an actual nation. And so it's kind of this half piratey nation that trades openly with other nations. Now, there's a lot of bad about the Hold of the Sea Princes too. There's 4 separate nobles that rule a different quadrant of it, and each one has their own opinion on slavery. That opinion ranging from slavery is no good to slavery is awesome, let's keep doing it. And so that too offers a lot of opportunity for role playing for players to say, I think I'm going to be the guy who frees the slaves. And a lot of nations around it, like the yeomanry, are very much anti-slave as well. So
if you're looking for like a place to be, a character is like, I want to be good and nice, right? The yeomanry, the peasant democracy, of some kind, proto-democracy.
True. Something, an area of the world that I really enjoy, not necessarily because of published, this is published material, in Dungeon Magazine, which, by the way, is one of the greatest publications ever related to... Yeah, RIP. Right. Dungeon Magazine was really terrific, and Paizo did great work with it. And they had a lot of material in there, and some of the material they had is David Howery is the name of a guy who published a series of adventures in the early days of Dungeon Magazine that were set or could be set basically in the Amedio jungle. And it's basically a jungle-themed adventure where there's kind of the Fort Thunder, which is the base camp of the northern British-like imperialists, and then they have Dr. Livingston-esque expeditions deep into the dark continent to have explorations, and there's interesting civilizations and old remnants, old ruins and stuff, and it's just beautiful color stuff. And I've been robbing shamelessly from it, and I'm actually running my Skype game through some stuff in there right now. And but Dungeon Magazine is full of great resources like that.
Oh, yeah.
You can find terrific callbacks to Greyhawk all throughout it.
Awesome. I think last thing that I would steal, besides some of the other stuff we've talked about, right? The Reign of Colorless Fire, all these, Ancient Evil Empire Mutually Assured Destruction, or AEEMAD, right?
Okay.
As we call it. For me is Flotus. Am I saying that right? Flotus? Foltus
of the blinding light.
I'm talking about the Flotus, of course, Melania Trump. No, yes. The basic idea is he is a god who commands his followers not to believe in any of the other gods, even though they're almost undeniably real. So if that's not like tinder for a fire of fun role playing and characters and NPCs, I don't know what is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the original template for the incredibly demanding, essentially lawful good deity, Foltus, excellent. And then also I'm a big fan of Reo, the kind of also another good deity, but more of a shepherd than a blinding light. So
yes, if you came to Dungeons and Dragons from 3rd edition, a lot of the Greyhawk deities were put in, and some of them are some of the like most interesting gods that you can have in Dungeons and Dragons that aren't just straight rips from some previous polytheistic mythology, like Weejas, Nerul, Bakab, Palor, Saint Cuthbert, all gods I really like.
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas where Gygax did a pretty good creative job.
Some exceptions, looking at you, Al Akbar.
Okay, sure, but I think he drew from a lot of different sources, pulled in a lot of tropes, because frankly, you want to have some tropes. You want to have some touchstone to cultural things that we sort of half-assed know about from history, and draw them in so that there's something that our brains can say, oh, okay, that's kind of a vaguely saint-like character with Saint Cuthbert. And I think that was a pretty well done job. A patchwork quilt that a friend of mine who's very into mythology is like, yeah, but no one ever really has a full mythos or pantheon of gods. Something that was improved in the Living Greyhawk side of things. But anyway.
Yeah. Any other favorite things to steal from? I mean, there's so much to cover here. From the Sea of Dust to the what was it? The blinding ice, the black ice.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a nod to Dave Arneson, included in the world of Greyhawk is this kind of area being swallowed by the ice called Blackmoor. But worth people's time is to go back and look at the DA series of first edition TSI modules, which was sort of when Gygax and Dave Arneson sort of reconciled, at least in part for legal reasons. And the DA series of Blackmoor modules was released by TSR. And there's some great creative stuff in there. Again, I'm a big fan of sort of sneakily combining the robots and ray guns into the
Barrier Peaks is part of the DA series.
No, it's not. No, okay. It's a completely separate thing, but the DA series, in its own way, throws in some spaceships.
Okay.
Kind of cool. Yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. We'll add a link to it. So final odds and ends as we wrap up our conversation on Greyhawk. Other fun things that we didn't get to mention that people got to know about.
Oh gosh, I mean, there's just so much. If you dig deeply enough into this world, you're gonna come across kooky stuff and wonder what you can do to bring this into your game. I think One area is called the Wild Coast that has a lot of
Coast.
Wild
Coast.
no,
Wild Coast.
but it has a lot of adventures set in it, and it's your fairly standard chaotic coastline where evil humanoids can strike at any moment, and I think that's just a great setting.
For me, I think another odds and ends that I love about Greyhawk is a lot of the NPCs are Gary and his family and close friends, old characters, right?
Absolutely.
And this is great advice, right? Steal an old character or two from past games if you've run before, and make them the most powerful NPCs in your game, right? The Circle of Eight, right, is a great organization as both friend and villain, right?
Right.
And also, I think from then on, I have always believed that magic should be divided into 8. I think 8's the magic number, right?
Okay, fair enough.
But whatever School of Rock says, the Circle of 8 is forever defined. That all my campaign settings, all my world building, 8 is the magic sacred number.
And that sounds like a great rule to me.
And I will fight anyone for no reason who disagrees.
Yeah, no, terrific. All I can tell you is go and take a look at the original. I know you can find these on the internet. You can find the original maps by Darlene, and definitely check out Anna B. Meyer stuff. Worth your time.
Yeah. So what's the as we close out, what's the worst name in Greyhawk in your opinion?
The NPC characters, all of them.
You mean Rigby, Zigbee, Bigby? You don't think those are original?
I think there's a certain gravitas to Gleep Werp the Eyebiter, but
sure. Mordenkainen sort of, well, that's, I guess, stolen from something Finnish, right?
That could be worse. I don't really mind that, but what was it? Faffel Dweomracraft was one of the half-elven NPC or pre-programmed PCs for the G series of the Against the Giant series. And in Ghost of Saltmarsh, there's a sea elf named Oceanus. Yeah, no, that was in the original version too. And okay, so some of these names could be a little better, but you know what? There's a certain amount of fun to just having absolutely zany, over the top names too. And if you can have a good laugh at that, then by golly, you haven't lost. All right, I feel like going and setting aside my planned confrontation with final confrontation with Winston Churchill and having my characters or players roll up characters to march out into the Sea of Dust and just explore some Sulawese runes. Right on. It's good stuff. Yeah, it sounds like a great time to me. I'm in. So. All right. Hell yeah. Andy, thanks again for being a guest on Dungeon Master of None. I had a great time. Excellent. Well, and thank you for listening. If you have any questions, leave us a voicemail at the Dungeon Master hotline or send us an email at dmofnone@gmail.com. If you get a chance, we'd really appreciate a rating or review. And until next time, keep rolling the dice.